Good evening and a warm welcome to Personal Finance. I'm Gugulethu, Cele. Delayed parenting is a new concept to the modern world in which we live. And according to some experts, there may be some kind of financial benefit to having children a lot later in life. For more on this, I'm joined by Karin Muller, who's the head of growth market solutions for Sanlam Personal Finance, who'll be talking to us about the benefits of delayed parenting. She's in our Cape Town studios. Karin, so good to have you with us on the show this evening. Maybe before we go any further, if you could unpack and decipher the concept and the definition of delayed parenting.
Hi, Gugu. I think the concept of delayed parenting started to surface a while ago, and this year, Dion Chang actually identified it as one of the top trends for 2015. And basically what it means is that lots of people start with their families later, whether or not that is because of societal reasons. Many women who start their careers first and first want to give their career a springboard, or whether or not it's through medical reasons and people make use of different fertility mechanisms to have a family who previously couldn't have a family. But we definitely see that people are starting their families later. And the reason why we have the conversation about the impact of your finances is if you start to have a family when you are 40, it means that you are probably still going to be responsible for your children when you are 60 and reaching retirement age.
Maybe if we can explore that further, because it almost seems as though it is a slightly catch-22 situation. The earlier you start, the more working life you have available in order to take care of your children. And the later you start, you'll probably be more financially independent and have more financial resources in order to provide for them fully. So I take it this is a discussion that a lot of individuals need to have, not only within themselves and with their family units, but even with their financial advisors to see if they're still on track with their financial goals.
Absolutely. I mean, the benefits of starting later with a family is that you can be more established in your career, and really the impact of delayed parenting on your finances will be dependent on what you did before you start your family. Did you get that foundation of proper retirement savings in place? Did you make sure that you get to a place in your career where you are more secure, etc.? However, if you use your 20s to play around and you use the money to, say, live it up and have a good life, then it is going to be slightly of a different picture. But when we think about now that you are in this situation and you have started your family a bit later, you carefully need to consider, how do I plan for this? How do I match my financial priorities? And how do I balance the thing about my children needing things, yet I also need to consider my retirement, and I need to think about the fact that I might not have that time when my kids are out of the house to do the last bit of saving for retirement.
Let's walk further through that concept in particular, Karin. Are there certain financial goals which one must have achieved significantly, like sufficient ownership of assets, as you say, appropriate retirement savings? And more importantly, how do you go about ensuring that you use the right financial tools to save for your children's healthcare and education, which we know in South Africa is actually quite costly?
Yes, it's very costly. As a mother of two toddlers, I definitely know that it's quite costly. So the basis of all of this is to have a proper financial plan in place. And a proper financial plan helps you to go, what are my immediate short-term needs? What do I need to provide for now? As well as what are my medium-term needs, taking care of my kids' education, and what are my long-term needs? And when you start a family, there are aspects to your financial situation that you need to take care of, like making sure you've got a proper will in place. A will is not only something that says, what do I need to do with my assets if something happens to me, but it also tells people who needs to take care of your children, what do you want for them, etc. So it deals with a lot of the softer issues around something like a family. Ideally, all of us would have loved to have build up an asset base, have bought our house and started our retirement savings before we embark on having a family, but that's not realistic. So a proper financial plan will look at your current situation and help you balance out those priorities, those short, medium and long-term priorities.
Something else that you alluded to, following up on the theme of the will, is obviously covering your risk appropriately. And that entails getting the necessary cover for what? Potential retrenchments at work, disability cover, and in the worst case scenario, being deaf. Because if your children are still fairly young, you need to make sure, as you say, that you have all the bases covered with regard to providing for them efficiently.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, that is a bit of the reality of having children later in life, is that you need to consider it. You need to consider what can happen if I'm no longer around. And you need to make sure that you've got enough savings in place and you've got enough risk protection in place to take care of them. And think about what they're going to need and properly plan that they're going to need to have financial support while they are still being schooled. They're going to need financial support for their tertiary education. And if at all possible, you want to put them on the right road going forward. Something else that you also carefully need to consider is who am I going to ask to be responsible for my children? If you have children quite early in life, that responsibility can fall back to your parents. But if you have children a bit later in life, that option becomes a little less, and you need to think, who do I have around me? And the other thing that you also need to consider is maybe reassess it continuously. The person you think is most appropriate to look after your children when you have them, when they are 1 or 2 or 3, things might change, that person might get older and also not be capable of looking after your children. So reassess it. Just like any other financial situation, you need to regularly reassess and make changes to fit your life at that point.
Karin, does having children later in life automatically mean that you need to retire a lot later too?
It doesn't have to. It can. Luckily, just like we are getting children later, many of us are living healthy, productive, active lives later in life as well. I mean, we also see that longevity is increasing. So I think for many of us, you don't necessarily have to if you had the financial planning in place. But we also see the emergence of a second career. People starting to do different things when they reach retirement age because they do not necessarily want to just sit back and relax for those years, but want to start to do something differently. I mean, and that's always an option. So preferably plan for your retirement, and then when it doesn't turn out that way and you are still eager and keen to work, then you do have that option.
Karin, just before we wrap up, I want to get your sense of the obvious question that a lot of viewers might ask tonight, which is how much money is actually enough for me to have if I want to start having children later in life? And I take it that obvious question goes back down to the individual assessment and the consumer's lifestyle that they live and how expensive or affordable it actually might be.
Absolutely. Because many of us raise our children differently, and what people in a more affluent household spend on schooling is somewhat different to what somebody in a middle market spends on schooling. And I mean, those differences are quite vast. But there are some basics that we all need to have in place. We need to be able to feed our children, provide them with clothing, shelter, and medical provision. So for you to look at what you need, ideally draw up a budget and look at some of your expenses. And remember that child rearing does mean that your medical aid will increase since there is another dependent. There will probably be additional healthcare costs, and schooling and tertiary qualifications are expensive. So plan for those properly. There are tools that can help people to plan for it and figure out how much they need to save. We also know that tertiary education increases by more than inflation. education inflation is quite steep. So you have to plan properly to send your children to university. And there are tools on most of the big financial providers' websites to help you do that.
Well, we've certainly heard quite a bit from Karin in this first half of our conversation, but let's get a quick summary and a recap of the key notes to remember. Well, Karin, maybe if you can give us a quick recap of some of the key takeaway points from this evening's conversation. What do they entail?
I think firstly, it's a fantastic, wonderful, rewarding opportunity to be a parent, whether or not it's earlier or later in your life. But if you do delay parenting and you start later, it is important to have a proper financial plan in place. Make sure you sort out your retirement. Make sure you balance those priorities between what you need immediately to have that baby, what you need in the medium term, as well as what you need in the long term. Make sure that you make sufficient provision in your will and risk cover to take care of your family, and that you can put your children on the best road for the future.
Karin, thank you so much for your wonderful insights today and explaining the concept of delayed parenting to us this evening. Well, that's where we leave it for Personal Finance tonight. A big thank you once more to Karin Muller, who's the Head of Growth Market Solutions for Sanlam Personal Finance. Now, do remember that we want to hear from you, so drop us a tweet or any of your comments or suggestions to @CNBC Africa using the hashtag Finance410 or to myself @Gugulethu on Twitter. Until next time, take care, everyone.